When someone outside of the project management industry talks about the project management plan, including senior management, they're often referring to the project schedule. Scheduling takes a central role in project management in the minds of many, and we'll define a few basics about scheduling in this movie. Those of us who have managed projects or are more experienced with what project management entails know that the project schedule is just part of the overall project management. However, it's a critical part and it's listed as one of the triple constraints that exist within a project. I'll explain what that means in just a moment. First, let's define a few basics. You'll notice that whenever I define something, particularly a term, it's through the perspective of PMI, the PMBOK guide, or the practice standard for scheduling. The reason is that these are the primary sources of the PMI SP exam, which tests your knowledge of scheduling based on many of the standards presented in these titles. With that said, let's define scheduling. Scheduling is the modeling, planning, creation, and management of the project's schedule. It is literally a roadmap of the project work that will result in the objectives of the project being met. The schedule should stay true to the scope of the project and will be managed within the defined constraints of the project. According to the practice standard for scheduling, a project schedule contains the planned dates for performing scheduled activities and the planned dates for meeting schedule milestones. The main objective of scheduling is simply to define the time required for a project and to execute the project work within that time. However, it's rare that things go exactly as planned, although we attempt to execute that work as planned, and that's where strategic management of the schedule comes in. There are various ways of displaying the schedule, which you'll come to know very well as you progress through this course, and many will be familiar to you based on your own work experience. The type of schedule format distributed would depend on who's receiving it. Typically, the higher up the individual, the less detailed the reports. Again, we'll get into that later on, but for now, just know that it comes in various formats. Moving on to that broader context, before the creation of the project schedule, there's much work to be done. In large or complex projects, there may exist the role of scheduler, who plays a central role in the strategic modeling and planning. Oftentimes, the project manager is the scheduler, but again, that depends on the organization and many times the needs of the project itself. In the section to come, we'll define what the following is in greater detail, which are the components that I referred to earlier as part of that broader context. We have the scheduling method, the scheduling tool, the scheduling model, and the project information. The result of this effort and information is the project schedule. We'll go over these items in greater detail in the section that follows. Before closing, I'd like to mention a few points about the triple constraints, since I had opened this movie by mentioning that the schedule is part of it. By that, I meant time. Mention of the triple constraints was removed from the 4th edition of the PMBOK guide, and it's now typically referred to as the classic triple constraints. The concept is still very much mentioned within the latest version of the PMBOK guide, but in a broader context, so it's still very relevant. The triple constraints consist of time, cost, and scope. The idea is that they're tied together. When one of these constraints is changed, the other two are likely to be impacted or affected by that change. I mentioned that in the latest version of the PMBOK guide, this concept has broadened to now include these things such as quality, risk, and resources. So for instance, if the scope is altered, there's a high probability that the quality will be impacted, as will the budget, schedule, and resources. There are different variations of these constraints, including of the triple constraints, but the concept is usually the same. Now that we've reviewed some basics about scheduling, we'll wrap up this movie and move on to cover time management in relation to the PMBOK guide.